let's suppose there's a wall in the middle of nowhere with no clear understanding of why or what is doing that. You're walking in the desert and there's a wall.
Yeah.
So his idea is that if you are a liberal, again, U.S. context, you're liberal or conservative. If you're a liberal, you might think, well, this doesn't make any sense, right? We don't need a wall here.
It's just a wall.
I don't understand it.
Yeah.
It's just a wall. Let's just tear it down because I can't get from here to there without climbing over it. I don't see why it's here. I have no idea. I looked around maybe a little bit. So it doesn't seem to serve any purpose. Let's just tear it down. And a conservative would say, yeah, I don't see any purpose, but there has to be one. There has to be a reason someone put it here, right? Maybe I don't understand it, but tradition exists for a reason. So instead of tearing it down, let's come to the conclusion, okay, let's take a step back, study, try to understand why this wall is here. So not to go over it or not to like kill it in a way, but like understand it and respect it because it's already there.
Okay.
So I don't think there's anything wrong with tradition in itself. What I argue is, and that will feed into my second point, is if you use tradition as a political value, I think you are misguiding your thinking. Very important to study, but also very important to be honest about what we showed with the study. I know that complete objectivity is a myth, but you strive for that, right?
So to give a bit of background, we know each other from jiu-jitsu, but you contacted me to record something, and of course I said, yes, you're welcome whenever, and that's always going to be the case. But as you were starting to talk in front of the camera and I was working in front of the computer and leaving you to it, I literally just stopped and started to listen to you. I was absolutely fascinated by the stuff you were talking about, and I literally took notes as you were talking. So I, of course, wanted to have you in front of the mic. So thank you for being here, first of all.
Thanks. Appreciate the opportunity. Also, of course, I'm happy to hear that, and I appreciate all the help I can get. You've been very supportive of helping me set up my own thing, which is something that I want to do. But yeah, happy to be here.
Awesome. Awesome. So let's give the people a bit of the background. Because you know a lot of politics, about ideology, about the way we think and how we should think better. And those are all topics of interest to me, and I really do hope for my audience as well. So just a bit of your background, because I find that quite interesting as well.
Okay, so I have a master's degree in psychology and also one in international relations. It's a bit of a longer story and not that interesting. But
we're here for long stories, so no worries. You can go as deep as you want to.
International relations. It was a long time ago. I'm older than I look. In ELTE University in Budapest. And I got into it mostly because it was interdisciplinary. So I was like, as most 18-year-olds, I didn't really know what I wanted to do out of life, but that sounded interesting, that I could learn a variety of things. And it was also very hard to get into. So there was that competitive element that sparked me that, it's super hard, so I'm going to try it. So I got in and I liked it. Actually, it was not at ELTE. It was at a different university in Budapest. But then I also got into ELTE, which is another university where I started studying psychology. And very soon it became clear to me that that was where my real interest was, in the field of psychology. It was super fascinating to me. I loved learning about how the human mind works, so that's where the thinking element comes from. And eventually, I did finish both, so I have these 2 masters. But eventually it became clear to me at the time that I wanted to be an academic. A researcher, the intellectual side appealed to me, but obviously there was the lifestyle element that you get to do cool stuff, get intellectually engaging conversations like this, but also inside academia and travel and teach and publish and all that. So I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do with my life. How do you do that? You need to get a Ph.D. So how do I get a Ph.D.? I had to get into research myself. And there I sat down with a couple of colleagues who had similar aspirations, literally a couple, 2 women. And pretty soon we decided that where our common interests lie was ideology. So political ideology, so political psychology and political ideology. So we started digging into it, started our own student lab at the university. And the more we got into it, the more I realized that, this is pretty much up my alley, what I want to study. Political thinking, and within that, political ideology. How do people think about politics and why they think about politics a certain way or another? So at first, when I applied, I also knew I wanted to do my PhD in the US, because that's where it's at. That's where, if you want to be a scholar, at least that's how I saw it at the time. If I want to be a scholar and do it for a living, I might as well go to where the level of education is highest. So when I first applied, I failed. And then I worked on correcting all the mistakes. And when I applied a year later, I got into the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, which is where I did my PhD in political science. So that's where I have a PhD in political science. It was a very fortunate choice in a way that, and this is what I suggest to anyone who asks about where to do your PhD. Pick a university pick based on the people, not the reputation of the university, not the general, not the climate or whatever. Pick the people who are very good at what they do in their specific subfield. And that's what I did, and it worked out beautifully from some perspectives, and we can talk about what was not so great.
Can we take like a short detour with regards to what makes a university an actual place of education? Because I think you just touched on that. Is it the actual place itself? Is it the professors? Is it the your colleagues there that together with them you get to form your ideas in the crucible of science? What or all of these does make a great university, in your opinion?
So, again, this is my personal opinion, but I would say it's mostly the people, and the institutions of the university are in place to attract the people and to enable them to be the best academic versions of themselves. Because, the university is not supposed to cover everything and make you a better person necessarily, but in terms of academic performance and how clear and fine-grained is your thinking in certain areas, I think that's an important goal. And to accomplish that, you need to attract good people. So yes, professors, but also students, PhD students, it's a whole system.
Got it.
And of course, we can talk about all sorts of angles, but where there's like a huge, stark difference between, I don't want to be like too generic here, because some European universities and Eastern European universities are great, and I'm currently working at UVT, which I also find very good. So it's not about that. But what I can say, based on my personal experience in the US, just the system part works very well. There are so many universities, the competition is high, and everything is wrapped up into a package. And that package includes decent pay for professors and not overworking them. I keep talking to my Eastern Europe, or not just Eastern Europe, my local colleagues, and like teaching a 3+3, which means 3 courses per semester in both semesters of the year is like the norm. That's okay. Like an American scholar or academic would be like, Jesus Christ. That's a very high teaching load.
Yeah.
That is not paid very well, but eats up a lot of your time. And it's not just about time. It's also about the quality of the work. And a lot of my colleagues do great work and great teaching, I'm sure. I haven't attended their classes because I didn't go to this university, but there's like certain limitations on what you can do if you have to teach so much.
Of course, like when you have time for building up yourself and your abilities and working on that side of the things, when you're just focused on teaching, I guess.
Or even your teaching. If you teach too many classes with too many students, you literally don't have the time to like sit back and evaluate or learn. You do, and you take the time because you're a good professional, but too much workload is never a good thing in or outside academia. If you're overworked, you are just putting out fires, focusing on doing what you can, but you don't actually have the time to invest into making it an amazing class. If you have one class to teach, you can make that an absolutely awesome class. If you have 3 or 4 per semester all the time, then it's difficult.
Absolutely makes sense. Good. So let's get back to you, because that was a great detour as well. But let's get back on track. So where were we left?
Nebraska.
There we go.
Nebraska is a very interesting place. And professionally speaking, it worked out great for me, because the university is not a very prestigious one. Like, you probably never heard of it. Most people haven't, and that's completely normal. It's not a Harvard or Yale or whatever. But for studying ideology in particular, it was awesome. We had some of the best people in the world, I would say, when it comes to ideology research. We're working out of that, lab/department that they built around it. So my graduate advisor, John Hibbing, was a very critically acclaimed and also very accomplished scholar. Also Kevin Smith, Beth Thiesmer. There's a lot of good people there who do good work. So speaking of, what makes it work, it's the people, but these people have the resources to also, make sure that they can implement all their plans. So there's like a very nice lab they built there. They did political physiology, which I'm actually happy to get into, because the specialty of the department was not just ideology research, it was biopolitics. I don't know how much you know about biopolitics. Most people don't, even academics don't. So
a lot. I know a lot about
Right, so biopolitics, briefly, but I've had to explain it so many times that I can. So it's the study of the biological underpinnings of political attitudes and behavior. And the idea that actually John
I think each and every word of that definition needs a definition of its own. So I don't know.
Maybe not attitudes and behavior.
Maybe not, but the rest.
But I will elaborate. So the idea is that, or at least where John and his colleagues started from in around 2005. So it's a relatively young discipline, but gaining a lot of traction. Was the idea that in psychology, we kind of know that a lot of things we study have some biological component. So the easiest I find to explain is personality traits. Everybody has heard of extroversion versus introversion, right?
Sure.
And when you think about it, you usually accept the fact that it's not just a product of your environment, that I'm like naturally an extrovert or introvert. That's who I am. It comes from somewhere deep down inside me. Most people don't have trouble accepting that. And if you study it, you find a reasonably strong heritability component, about 40% for most traits.
Nature and nurture. So we're not talking...
Nature and nurture.
Nature
Very
and
happy you put it that way, because nature versus nurture debate is dead and buried, and it should always stay that way. But yes, nature and nurture, exactly. But when it comes to, interestingly, even today, when it comes to your political ideas, most people have trouble accepting that that they have something to do with your nature, not just nurture.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I see where you're going with this.
Most people tend to think that, you just, not blindly, but you sort of adopt your family's ideology, or you hear ideas, and then you rationally sit down and make up your mind that this is what I'm going to believe. I'm going to be moderate, left-wing, and that's who I am because of my choice and my environment.
Yeah.
Most people don't think about the biological underpinnings of that. And that's what the research of John and others brought into the fray. And turns out there is a pretty strong heritability component. Now, the chain of causality is a bit tenuous at present, but
still
they're
blurry.
working on it. Yeah, but they're working on it. And the best I can explain it is the fear response, because that's also where the research is strongest. Fear response and negativity bias. Negativity bias is best explained by an example. Let's say, or even I can do both in one example.
Sure.
You have a threatening stimulus in your environment, nothing to do with politics, right? It can be a scary bear or a snake or whatever that, in all humans, it will evoke some sort of response. You see something threatening, you pay attention to it, and then you react to it in a certain way. So that exists in everybody, but like with most traits, there's individual variations. Some people have a stronger response, and some people have a weaker response. Now, what you can study, and which is what they did early on, was you take a bunch of people, and you show them threatening stimuli, and then you put skin conductance measures on their skin, which levels your autonomic nervous system arousal. All it does is arousal. How much does your system light up if you see something threatening? Okay? And what you can tell is, and then of course you take all the measures from a bunch of people, and then you look at their ideology. And what they find is conservatives, this is a US context, and we can talk about how that may or may not apply here. But
how culture affects things as well.
Yes.
I see.
But, in the US, you have a pretty strong polarized divide between liberals and conservatives, and I have qualms with that, but this is not that part of the story. This is a part of the story where if you look at the ideology of these people, what you can find, and that this has been replicated numerous times, is that people who react stronger to negative and threatening stimuli tend to be more conservative.
Makes sense if you think about it.
Pretty solid finding. What I find also very interesting, and they got this criticism early on, that, does it mean conservatives are cowards? No, it doesn't. What it does mean is that automatically, and this has nothing to do with your environment, your parents, or your conscious thinking, you see something threatening, you react to it. But then what you do about that may be cowardice. So there's two things you can do. You can run away from the threat, or you can confront the threat.
Fight or flight and freeze and so on.
Exactly. You can fight it, or you can flee. But your automatic response is there.
You see.
So that's biopolitics in a nutshell.
You know what I find most interesting about this thing, and this ties back to the video you recorded, when you mentioned that we're starting to use science and the way we are able to understand much more of the things that surround us and how we think. And this, when you said the thing about like tying the electrodes and measuring, you're basically measuring conservatism inside of people with electrodes. So this is where science intervenes and actually is able to falsify and introduce the scientific method into all of this, which till now was only at the level of, two guys philosophizing about things without actual data to back it up.
That's right. And I think it's very important to study all of that. What's also very important is and this is a bit on both sides, for scientists to be very, and most people are, to give them credit, but how do I phrase this correctly? So if you're an academic, you have to, or, there's this idea that you're always selling something. And I think that's true. Even if you're an academic, you try to sell your work. Now I'm talking about not in peer review, but outside the peer review process. So there's an incentive, and this is like for high profile scholars, not regular Joes like me. But there's an incentive to, if not inflate, but to inflate your conclusions a little bit.
Be more marketable, maybe?
And that may involve, and a lot of scientists are actually pushing back against this themselves, but this is like scientific journalism's major dilemma, I would say. You want to promote the stuff, so you want to make it sensational and dramatic, but in the process you may lose a great deal of what's good about science, and that's about being honest about where we can extrapolate this. It's all about where you can and cannot extrapolate this. So what I'm saying is very important to study, but also very important to be honest about what we showed with the study. I'll give you an example. Genetics. They did a bunch of studies with genetics. And that's where it all started, because the idea is that if your political ideology is at least partially predisposed by your genes, which is the title of their book, not determined, predisposed by your genes, then there has to be some way to study that. And there is. It's called twin studies. You can look at identical twins and see how their ideology correlates, and teasing apart a couple of technical factors that we shouldn't get into, you can see how the difference between identical and fraternal twins translates into their similarity in terms of ideology. So that's the method, very important to study. But then also very important to qualify what you have found. And what they have found was about a 30-40% heritability for political, not traits, but political ideas, so ideology. So we have to be clear about what that does and doesn't mean. Because then, of course, a lot of people say, hey, where's the political gene? If you have that gene, you're going to be a conservative. If you have that gene, you're going to be liberal. That's never going to be like that. And they didn't say it, and nobody can say it, because also that these kind of, we're not talking about a single trait thing, right? We're not talking about, a certain, or Huntington's disease, which is a single gene disorder. We're talking about complex things that interact with the environment all the time. So your genes interact with each other, they interact with your environment, and they produce you.
Wow. Just as you said that, I was thinking about all the implications if such a gene were to be found.
But it will never be found.
Hopefully, I guess.
No,
because
there's no
it would
one
be
political gene.
Havoc and mayhem. Good. So, I actually really want to get into the topic of the video you recorded last time, which is about how tradition is, in your words, I think you put it, a garbage value when it comes to political.
That's exactly how I put it, yes. Thanks for watching and studying.
Trust me, I watched it more than a couple of times. So
you're one of the two people who have.
I found that quite fascinating, to be honest, because I myself think that I have more of a conservative leaning, but I found your ideas to be exceptionally well thought out, of course, but also one of the people that I knew I could have a discussion on this topic with that would be civil and I guess based on some sort of a fact and common understanding. Yeah. So let's try that and let's start with the example that you gave, that Ben Shapiro gave, with the wall in the middle of nowhere. Or maybe you could just give a brief background, like what would be the 2-minute summary of the subject itself.
Okay,
so,
we don't even need 2 minutes, I think. So the wall analogy, I think, is a very good one. So, and it's not something he has said often, but I accidentally caught it when I said it, I believe, on Joe Rogan. So the idea is that let's suppose there's a wall in the middle of nowhere with no clear understanding of why or what is doing that. You're walking in the desert and there's a wall.
Yeah.
So his idea is that if you're a liberal, again, U.S. context, you're liberal conservative. If you're a liberal, you might think, well, this doesn't make any sense, right? We don't need a wall here.
It's just a wall.
I don't understand it.
Yeah.
It's just a wall. Let's just tear it down because I can't get from here to there without climbing over it. I don't see why it's here. I have no idea. I looked around maybe a little bit. So it doesn't seem to serve any purpose. Let's just tear it down. And a conservative would say, yeah, I don't see any purpose, but there has to be one. There has to be a reason someone put it here, right? Maybe I don't understand it, but tradition exists for a reason. So instead of tearing it down, let's come to the conclusion, okay, let's take a step back, study, try to understand why this wall is here. So not to go over it or not to like kill it in a way, but like understand it and respect it because it's already there.
Awesome.
I think it's a great analogy for the role of tradition and how you might view it in different ways.
It is. And I think from there we could start. I have a personal example, and maybe we can branch off of that. So in our system, in my system in which I am with my profession, we know that it's over-bureaucratized, if that's even a word. It's highly undigitalized. I think I'm inventing words every second sentence.
What's wrong with that?
And I've been trying to think of a way to make it better. But with that want of mine and with that goal, I've always tried to be cautious of the way in which I implement the change, because I'm conscious that even if the system, which is now inefficient and lacking, might be worse served by even my best intentions to get it to the next level, so to say. So this is where I think the balance with conservatism and what do you call it? Like progressive.
Progressive is actually better because that's the opposite of conservative. Liberal is the opposite of authoritarian.
Perfect.
So yeah, it's a bit mixed up in the U.S. context, but yes.
So this is where I'm trying to balance things, because we're looking at that wall and we're seeing that from our point of view, it serves no purpose. But maybe by tearing it down, we would open the floodgates to something that we are by definition not able to anticipate from our current point of view. And just keeping in mind that people that built that wall invested quite a significant amount of energy in actually building that, So maybe you would have some opinion with that on that regard as well.
Yeah, a couple of things. So one, now I think we're still talking about the same thing, but change management is a little bit different because every profession needs to evolve, right? Even a lot of conservatives are very business oriented and they recognize the need to digitalize and evolve. So that's a different side of tradition. What I want to say is two things. One, to make it very clear, I'm not arguing against tradition per se.
Okay.
So I don't think there's anything wrong with tradition in itself.
So
if you're
for
into
instance,
folk music or if you like traditional food, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I like traditional food. I'm not into folk music that much, but whatever. So there's nothing wrong with, or when we go to jiu-jitsu class, we put on the gi because that's also part of our tradition. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Okay. In itself, what I argue is, and that will feed into my second point, is if you use tradition as a political value, I think you are misguiding your thinking. And it's not an easy thing to spot, even in yourself. You have to be like very aware. There are a couple of avenues this can work. You have to be like very aware of when it's happening to you. And I will give an example now. It's totally unrelated to what you said, but gender roles are a common topic. And I think if you have like an informed opinion on gender roles based on your thinking or based on a lot of like reading, thinking, research, and reiterating the ideas, there's nothing wrong with that. But that's not, if your viewpoint is based on purely on tradition or mostly on tradition, which, let's be honest, seems to be the case often, then I think that's the part I have problems with. Mm-hmm. So let me elaborate even a little bit more. When people discuss gender roles, usually, even though they won't say it out loud, the idea is that if you look back in the past of human history, women's place was in the home and their role was to be like the family hearth provider, bringing everybody together, making connections, and the man's role used to be to provide and go out into the world and all that. So again, if you have like more arguments for that, that's a different conversation. But if your argument is that because that's how it used to be, therefore we should do the same today, so that's the part I have a problem with.
So here's where I have some disagreement with you. I really want to jump into this because
please.
How much of a chance do we want to take in, I guess, going on a different route from the one that has already been set with regards to these gender roles in thousands of years? Because we are now starting to deviate quite significantly.
It's been on for decades.
Exactly. And I think we're starting to see some of the disadvantages of the route that we have chosen as well with regards to gender roles now. But how much of a chance do we want, for instance, maybe the impact of our options now to deviate from that path is going to be felt in 50 years, in 100 years from now, and it's going to have quite negative consequences. So are we sure that we want to embark on that journey in the first place, knowing that for thousands of years it served us quite right? And that's tradition, basically.
Okay, so I think I have an answer to that, but I'm glad you put it this way because you just described how a lot of people who self-identify as conservatives feel. And yeah, this is pretty much it.
Okay.
Why change something that maybe might be perfect, but is good enough, and we don't know what will happen down the line.
Exactly.
And first of all, I think that's a legitimate, I mean, I don't have to validate your way of thinking, but I think it is a legitimate way to think. Because there's nothing wrong with being cautious, and there is unpredictability in the world. So whatever social institutions we change or implement may have unforeseen consequences. That's where I have a lot, or at least in the way I think, I assign a very significant role to science, but not science as an institution that you blindly believe in, or not just to say, oh my, science will give
I am
all
science.
the answers.
As we've heard recently in our past.
So yeah, not that. What I'm thinking is, and this will go back to even the wall thing, I think it's a great analogy because it can also show that where we are today, there are no walls like that. Mm-hmm. Because the way our understanding has advanced, we can't predict the future with certainty, but there's a lot of knowledge out there that we can build on. So that's the point I made in my video, and that's the same point I will make here. This is not a thing. There are no walls in the middle of nowhere with no purpose. You can actually understand why it's there, and you should. And I think you should base your opinion on what to do next off of that. So going back to the gender roles thing, yes, that's how things used to be. I think if you're making up your mind about gender roles today, what you ought to do is figure out why. figure out the mechanisms by which that works. That way you can actually mitigate the impact of what will happen in the future, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense. But now what I would propose is the following. So if we were to take each and every wall and dissect its meaning and its necessity, then maybe we would find some party that has an interest that is opposed to ours, that would be able to use that opportunity to introduce something that is, again, opposed to our own interest. And let me be a bit more specific. What if, for instance, science, as in my opinion has been badly used in the last couple of years, were to be used as an instrument of oppression, as an instrument to see the agendas of some people that are, again, not aligned with our own. And in that way, progressivism is but a tool to reach an agenda that is,
So what do you think can protect against that?
I don't know if I really have an answer to that. I guess it's just like the stock market. It just goes up and down, and at least we can keep the trend going up.
Yeah, but that's us as a society. But if you notice, of course, that's assuming a couple of things, but you clearly notice because you're talking about it. So what do you think can protect you against, let's say, a progressive who wants to jam something down your throat, like business science?
To be honest, what we're doing now, like talking through it and trying to figure it out, I think that's one of the most important tools that we have in our arsenal, like actually using our brain, even if we do it badly, but at least trying to separate the wheat from the chaff, as they said.
Exactly. So you see, your critical thinking, we're employing critical thinking, which is precisely my point. We are trying to understand what's going on and why, and based on that, we'll make an informed judgment. So this is like the scientific process as I understand it at work. And it's not science as an institution, it's science as a process.
Awesome, then. So this is a way of disagreeing that is constructive for both parties, I think. And it sort of serves an intrinsic good for the people that are in the dialogue itself more than the actual discussion, but it helps them better, literally become better versions of themselves.
That's the idea. That's also the goal I want to fight for, let's say. And in the process, we might even lose a lot of the parties you mentioned.
I see. So maybe
the opposing sides, liberals and conservatives. I think if we have this kind of conversation often enough, and we go beyond the party line, the labels, and we talk about like a specific issue and all the different angles of the issue, which is, by the way, what I also want to promote on my YouTube channel here, everywhere, but also with my research now, because I'm going back into research, and we can talk about that later. But there are a couple of tools we know, and deliberation is one of them that can promote this kind of thinking when you actually engage with all angles of one single issue instead of going by the party line, whichever that is. I think this is the kind of thinking that can really help, and we may even realize that when going into something like this or deliberation, you think where you stand and where someone on the other side stands, but you might realize that these sides are a bit too simplistic.
Can we talk about that? Like, how did you feel when you were in the United States? How did you feel the state of the state, so to say? And maybe if you have any opinions on the way that divide has been greater and greater.
Oh, a lot, of course. But I will give a personal example. So it was, it's actually like an interesting cultural difference. Because when I was studying politics and political psychology in Hungary, studying as a student, but still as an emerging scholar, let's say, I actually went through great lengths to remain independent. And I felt like that was like my professional obligation as an analyst.
What do you mean by independent? Let's just define that term.
To never take a side. To always say, this is what I like about Fidesz, this is what I don't like about them, and for these reasons, they're doing this right, they're doing this wrong, and say that always about the opposite party. So every party. I'm an analyst, I'm removed from the equation. I have my own views on issues and whatever, But when it comes to analyzing parties and ideologies, I'm totally independent. And I try to be as objective as possible. We know that complete objectivity is a myth, but you strive for that, right? So that's what I did.
Fair enough.
And it worked. Like even I remember in college when I asked, I don't know how it came up, but we were talking about who voted for what party. And I never told them anything. And I asked, like, who do you think I voted for? Nobody guessed right. But they had like very strong feelings about it. Like, oh, certainly voted Fidesz, right? Like, I know you and I've heard you talk about politics. So you definitely, and the other guy said, no, you certainly voted this. And I did vote. I do vote. But that's not my point. My point is that it worked. Like, I was so independent that people didn't know what party, and I don't strongly affiliate with a party. Now, fast forward a couple of years, I'm sitting in the lab, in the computer lab of my department, and a friend of mine comes in and asks, hey, so, by the way, politically, where do you lean? And I'm like, I'm an independent. What? Oh, okay. But like, if you had to choose, what would you be? I'm like, I'm an independent. I don't pick sides. Yeah, but if you really had to choose, so I said something. But the point is not. The point is that, and I think this has pros and cons. But in the U.S. context, nobody I know strives for this. They're very clear about their own political leanings.
Yeah.
The idea being that it's okay to admit where you stand. And, just be upfront about your own bias. But in your teaching and in your work, you try to be objective.
That makes sense. Okay, but how...
So the divide is very strong. And, in academia, where I think it's unfortunate, and it's not just me saying this, people, recognize this. It does color your views to some extent, being so upfront about them. But also... There's not even an open secret. It's just a known fact that, especially in political science departments, but in social science in general, the majority of scholars are left-leaning. They are way more liberal.
I was going to ask you that. If you think that...
No, it's not just my opinion.
So you have an insider's perspective, so...
Yeah, definitely. So it's a thing.
Okay.
So you have very few conservatives. I even heard prominent scholars like John saying that we need more conservatives to do this with us so we can incorporate different perspectives. But of course, it can hurt.
So what do you think about the fact that they're pushing diversity so much, but not diversity of opinion and of ideology? I think that's the actual discussion that it is in vogue now. Like, you're the ones pushing diversity with regards to all the fields of play, but not with regards to diversity of opinion.
Yeah, well, there's a lot I could say about polarization. I think a lot of people see it. A lot of people see it. Even a lot of people on that side, if we're talking about sides, see it. They see it as a problem. It's an increasingly... the problem starts when... And again, this is not me saying it, but when you start oppressing people's right to free speech and freedom of ideas, because that's not what academia or life is supposed to be about. But when there are certain things, and I do think there are certain things you are not supposed to say, but the more you expand that category, the more you limit people's right to expressing themselves. I think it's quite a clear-cut conversation, to be honest. I don't find it particularly interesting. Unfortunately, it's there, so we have to talk about it.
But we also have historical examples of how that can go around.
Yeah, we do.
And then the question is... And maybe we can tie it back to how many times we want to take the route of deviating from tradition. Like,
I think
how
we
many
always
times...
want to understand it.
Yeah.
I don't think we ever want to blindly... I even think this, like, I use the analogy, but it's as any analogy, it's a bit simplistic. But when it comes to, like, let's talk about specific policies. Let's talk about gender roles. When it comes to this, like, okay, and this is actually a real survey question that still gets asked today, that let's say a woman's place is in the kitchen / a woman's place is wherever she wants to be. Or the man has to provide and the man's primary role is to put food on the table. You can paint with a broad brush and you say, okay, let's look at it from an ideological standpoint. This is tradition, right? So do we want to, is there a reason why this is the case? And then maybe we should be cautious about approaching it, which is kind of what you said. I'm not trying to put you in a bracket, or you can say, screw all that. Let's just move forward with this brand new world ideology. What I say is neither. What I say is, let's try to understand where this is coming from, have an informed conversation. For example, I will give you my personal opinion. I see no real justification for this division of labor, clear cut for men and women. I don't see any argument for why a woman can be the primary provider. I may see an argument for if between two consenting adults that decide to start a family, one of them assumes the role of the primary provider, the other one assumes the role of more staying at home and connecting the family. I have zero problem with that. It's their choice. And if in 70% of the cases, that's the man, and 30% of the cases, that's a woman, or if it's, between two men or two women, I also don't care about that at all. But I think so to tie it back, if you recognize that there is some advantage to be gained by dividing the roles, and you sit down and you decide this is how we want to divide it, and it happens to be what was traditionally the case, that the man is the one who makes more money, let's say, and the woman stays at home, or the other way around, I don't care.
Do you think there's a way...
You can take what was good about it, and implement it in your own life without saying, this is how it has to be, just because you're a man, just because you're a woman.
There you go. So in your own life, do you think there's a way to pose these questions at the level of the individual?
Yeah,
and then
of course.
Not generalize, and maybe even recognize that at a general level, maybe this would apply, but it's very important to first start at the level of the individuals.
Absolutely.
And see what is actually working for you in that particular relationship with regards to that particular man or woman, and so on.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely.
Good.
And you can build on what was going on in the past, but to make an informed judgment, you have to understand why these things came to be. Or, we can talk, gender roles is a hot topic. We can talk about it all day. But physical strength, that's something that...
Yes, but I think that's where the point lies, because if more progressives were to make the concession that you just made, I think the discussion would go along much easier. Because when you just paint with a broad brush, this is what we need in order for society not to break down. We need women to get out of the kitchen and so on. Then that conservative trait is starting to also show the negative aspects of it as well.
Yeah,
like push back. Because when you strike with some amount of force, the equal and opposite amount of force is going to push back on that. On that action as well.
Yeah, let me add a little spice to that. So I was talking to a young Muslim woman. We happened to hitch the same ride back from Budapest to Timisoara, and she is starting her life here now. And we're talking, and this is also like about tradition and women and all that. So she was very clearly Muslim, and she was open to talking about it. So I asked her a couple of questions, and she was wearing the hijab and everything.
Sure.
And she is from Sweden. And she experienced a lot of the pushback on that side.
Interesting.
A lot of people coming up to her and saying, you are oppressed. You have to get out of this. She had a conflict with a teacher who didn't want to allow her to wear the hijab in school because...
I'm not going to allow you to be oppressed anymore.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Okay.
So, this is kind of even a cheap shot, but these kind of things happen all the time. It's the same with like women in the kitchen. And a lot of people, to be fair, a lot of people on both sides recognize this, that the idea is to empower people to have a choice. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's great about all the gender-related developments, that now if you're a woman living today, you may choose to do whatever you want. That's what I want for my daughter. If you have a daughter, that's what you'll want for her too. If she wants to be a world-class jiu-jitsu competitor, so be it. If she wants to be a housewife, so be it. It's not my place to say, but she has that option, right?
I can be perfectly okay with having options, but when you allow for options and then you come and try to, have that person aimed in a certain direction with regards to the option that you just created, and not actually being... taken with regards to the free will of that person, that I have a problem with.
So do I, and so do most reasonable people, I think.
Because we're creating the opportunities for women to go into the workplace, and then we're more or less forcing them, even if it's only by cultural ways, to actually go into the workplace where maybe not the majority, but some women certainly would be better served and live a happier and more fulfilling life if they were actually, if they would actually stick to the traditional, if we were to use this label, gender role that we had so far. You know?
Yeah, sure, but they can. To be fair,
exactly.
In today's Romania, I think if you're a young woman, you have that choice.
That's great. And the fact that the choice is there is great. But when we go a step further, and again, maybe culture is now set up in the way in which not taking that option is a problem, that I have a problem with.
Yeah, I think we're pretty clearly in agreement about that. And so do so are most reasonable thinkers.
I would hope so.
On this, at least. On the Muslim thing, that's even a bit of a different subject, but you know, where I always come down is, you know, and that's what she said too, like, why can't you respect my choice to do the thing you think is oppressive, but this is what I want to do.
Fair enough.
Right? Okay, you know, and you can argue, of course, that why does she want to do that? Is it the cultural pressures? But at some point, you know, that's like a rabbit hole that you can always go down as deep as you want. At some point, you have to recognize that in terms of like what religion you follow and how you implement it in your life, as long as it doesn't harm other people, is up to you.
Sorry,
so if you want to be, if you choose to be oppressed by my standard, not personally speaking, but from the perspective of that teacher, for example, or random people going up to her and saying, oh, you know, what's going on with you? Screw you. How can you be this way? Why can't you be a more enlightened woman? And she is very like enlightened. She's studying medicine in a foreign country. She just chooses to be a Muslim. What's wrong with that?
Even more so. And sorry if this is too much of a sidetrack. Have you by any chance watched the discussion between Jordan Peterson and the Muslim scholar that's been recently posted, floating around?
No, unfortunately not.
You should definitely try it. And just to give a brief context, Peterson was for some time now trying to learn more about the Muslim world, and he's just recently started a series of dialogues and discussions with regard to the topic. And he was invited to, I'm always blanking on the actual term of their institution, like our church. He was invited to a
mosque?
A mosque, I guess.
It's not the institution, it's the building.
The actual building, yes, correct. And he had a very interesting, very intense, but I guess very necessary talk with, again, a Muslim scholar, which I found fascinating, because if we were to step back and zoom out from politics, what underlies it, in my opinion, is religion. And that's a topic that I guess is very necessary to have in our world, where Christianity and Islam are two of the most important religions of our world. But again, sorry if it's too much of a sidetrack. I just found that interesting.
No, not at all. And religion and politics are in an interesting relationship.
Right.
Officially, of course, we try to separate them as much as possible. And that has been the call for hundreds of years, to secularize politics and make sure religion doesn't play a role in that. But it does.
It does. Like,
religious views and political views, or not necessarily religious views, but in the U.S. context, religious intensity and political views are often correlated. But also, you know, at least for a couple of hot button issues, abortion is an obvious one. But even same-sex marriage is quite obvious in this part of the world, and maybe some others. Religion obviously plays a role, a huge role. Churches actively campaigning for one side of the issue. I don't even care which one, but it's very clearly an intertwined issue where politics and religion work together. Think about the Pope's involvement or what he tries to promote. You can't, I think you should, at an institutional level, aim to secularize politics to the extent possible. But let me give you another example, actually related to the same American friend. He found out that the former prime minister of Hungary, which was a long time ago now, like 13 years ago, was a self-proclaimed atheist.
Okay. And
he thought that was awesome. Not just because... no, it was awesome that he could be. Because in today's America, if you want to get elected, you can't... If you want to have a chance at
Yeah.
Okay, maybe in a very secular district you could be an atheist, but if you want to be president, you can't be an atheist.
On either side.
No.
On either side.
No, on either side. You have to at least pretend to be religious. Otherwise, people won't vote for you.
Yeah, that is interesting.
So it's not a real separation of powers. And think about all political leaders, even Putin, how often he shows up in church. Erdogan, a Turkish president, or how often he goes to the mosque. Viktor Orban shows up in church, holds a lot of conferences in monasteries and stuff. The marriage of religion and politics is not, maybe it's an open relationship, but it's not broken. They are not divorced.
And what I found fascinating, and you put the nail in the coffin, you mentioned it a few sentences ago, abortion was the main topic, the main subject that people stated when they came out of the voting booths at these midterms in the United States as being the subject that most influenced their vote. Mm-hmm. Which I found fascinating when you think about inflation, when you think about all the economic meltdown, when you think about the involvement in external politics with the war and so on, like both wars, the Iraq retreat and the Ukraine situation. Like none of those counted as much as the recent abortion debacle counted.
I don't know. I don't have the data on that. Are you sure? Yeah. I'm sure. I don't know. But there is data. It's Gallup conducts an opinion poll, and they do ask what the most important question facing the nation is. They ask it on a very regular basis. So anyone can go to their website and track. I would be moderately surprised if abortion had the highest rating, but I take your general point that its importance in the national agenda seems to be disproportionate to. Yeah, we're navigating weird waters here, but it could be construed as disproportionate to its importance in the great scheme of things.
Yeah, again, it is of high importance without a doubt. And if we were to again zoom out and think about the impact that it's going to have throughout the years, then definitely. But I'm pretty sure, and I don't want to disinform people, so you might as well check out the website from Gallup and see the actual poll results. But I'm pretty sure it was stacked higher than economy in any case.
That has happened before, so I will be moderately surprised if that's the case, but I won't be surprised to see like a 15% for abortion. It's also the recent Supreme Court ruling. Yeah. I actually wrote a series of articles on abortion. Do
you want to get into that? Because
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's
and I was coming at it. It was a while ago, but I was coming at it from the same perspective that if you look at it through an ideological lens, you have a very clear-cut view that ignores all the opposing arguments. So what I tried to do was actually cover all the arguments that you could think of when it comes to abortion without rushing to judgment, or indeed without reaching any sort of judgment, just for the sake of, okay, let's see what's important here. But before we get into that, which I'm happy to do, but I think abortion is great from a couple of perspectives. Great, when I say great, I mean great in terms of an attention grab. Okay. And that's not to say it's not, I don't think abortion is an important subject. But it ticks a couple of boxes that can make a political issue or, grab a political issue and put it on the top of the national agenda. And one is it's very visceral. Inflation is a big deal. And the moment you actually see the prices rising and you see it, depleting your bank account, it becomes very personal. But it's not visceral. It's not a life or death thing. When you're thinking abortion, and especially as sides painted,
absolutely,
it's like, dead babies. What can be more emotionally, grabbing that? So there's that. Also, it's very easy to polarize. Mm-hmm. And I actually use it very often as an example of how you can.
Sorry if I interject.
Sure.
It's very easy to understand. Like, the economy is the economy is the economy. I mean, come on.
Very good point.
Like, almost nobody understands the economy. And if they did, they probably way down there, up there in the clouds.
Or even the war, right? You can make multiple arguments, NATO's involvement, oil and gas and economics and everything. But abortion is simple.
Like dead babies. There you go. Sorry, go on.
No, I think it's a fair point. What I often see, very often, And this is also like a good representation of what can go wrong in political dialogue and political thinking, which is the opposite of what I stand for. Mm-hmm. And this is very easy to do with abortion, because if you look at how, again, in the U.S. context, each side argues, it's a very clear example of motivated reasoning. You're not trying to take into account everything. You've already made up your mind that abortion is bad. Abortion is bad or it's good. And then you collect only the arguments that are relevant to your point of view.
I do totally agree
how
with
it typically works is, if you are pro-life, then you only look at it from the embryo standpoint. You're only looking at that baby. You call it a baby, even if it's just like 2 weeks old. You call it a baby. And already motivated reasoning at work. So you have seen pictures of, or like ultrasound images of like a 2-week-old. You can't even see it.
It's just a couple of dots.
Yeah. So you call it a baby.
So you use language, the power of language, to already program
of course,
the discussion.
That's encoded into the DNA of politics in general. But then you look at it only from that perspective. That embryos or babies' right to existence, that's a human being. And if abortion goes through, we're killing a human being. And that's wrong. It's usually, by the way, another reason why abortion is a great subject is precisely the involvement of religion. Very closely ties to religion. The inflation has nothing to do with religion, right? You can talk about inflation, but will you hear a priest preach about inflation or no inflation or war? You could, because it's killing people, and that's bad by the Christian tradition and most religious traditions. But with abortion, it's usually very clear. At least the Catholic Church has come down strong. Even the Orthodox Church, I believe, at least I've seen the signs of say no to abortion. So it's usually quite clear that you are, as a religious person, you are supposed to say that abortion is bad and it's a crime. And I assume, I'm not religious, but I love learning about religion. But I assume it's because it's not in your power to decide who gets to live and die, right? Mm-hmm. So that's one side. And you completely ignore the other side, which is what I'm about to say. What typically happens with liberals, they don't look at it from the embryo's perspective at all. And again, now this is not people who actually get informed, but still I think that characterizes a big chunk of the population who don't want to learn. So you look at it only from the mother's standpoint, right? You ignore the child completely. It's all about the mother's choice. Therefore, pro-life, pro-choice. I think the labels are good because they highlight the only part you care about. So it's only about the mother. It's my body, my choice. It's my right to self-determination. And that baby is not a human being. It's all about the mother and empowering women to do whatever they want with their bodies. I think both sides are completely wrong. And it's very, very easy to refute, because in this case, yeah, sure, but the whole point is that it's not. I think that's where we can have an informed discussion. Is it a part of the woman's body, or is it a separate entity? And these are the discussions that have been happening for decades. Even in Roe v. Wade's ruling, that was, they went to great lengths about establishing when life starts. And it's always going to be arbitrary, but I think that's where you can have an actual conversation when you listen to other people and take into account. And there are very interesting things too, but let's stay on this level for now, because I think
No, with regards to the point at which that baby becomes viable, or that embryo becomes viable, so to use both terms from both sides, I found it interesting how the United States has yet to legislate what apparently even we in Romania have legislated in our criminal code for some time now, because they are only now beginning the discussion with regards to, well, maybe we should have the possibility for the mother to make this decision up to 6 weeks, up to X amount of time from conception. And apparently we've already done the math on this, and we've already come to
what did the Romanian?
I think it's 6 weeks, then you can do it even longer than that in some cases. So exactly with regards to if the conception was from an act of violence like a rape and so on.
Very
so
common.
all these are taken into account by law in some states, and the Americans are only now beginning the discussion.
That's not entirely true.
Is it?
Yeah, because even in Roe v. Wade, which is, I believe, from 1973, if I'm not mistaken, they did make a trimester-based distinction. So what you
Good.
can do, your options are different based on first, second, or third trimester, where you are in the pregnancy. And that's, I think, a very important point. I discuss it at great lengths in the article, because this is like the time in the pregnancy is, again, if you are very strict, then you can argue either way. But most people aren't. This is why I wanted to bring up, like, I think abortion is a great example to show how thinking can go wrong, but also right if we ask the right questions. So in a Gallup poll, again, people were asked pro-life or pro-choice, and they were very evenly split. So if the only question you ask is pro-life or pro-choice, it will be an almost 50-50. But they did ask specific follow-up questions, like the one you mentioned. It's a common one if it's a result of rape, which obviously changes things. The overwhelming majority of people on both sides of the spectrum, so that includes a lot of conservatives, said, okay, that's different. There's something different there. So you see, if you ask the right questions and if you as a person answering the questions actually think, all of a sudden you're like, okay, no, that's a different case. There, the mother should have more of a say in what she does.
Yep.
A very common other thing is if the mother, and this is like a very interesting moral dilemma, if the pregnancy poses a serious health risk to the mom.
There we go. And I'm pretty sure, and again, my criminal law knowledge is quite limited. I've long read a long time ago the criminal code, but I think even this is
usually is. It's I did a bit of research into it, and it's quite common to have a couple of qualifiers.
If it poses a significant health risk to the mother as well, or to the
then usually
to the viability of the child.
Yeah, and that's like in the legal code, but also if you ask people when they hear this, a lot of them will be like, okay, in that case it might be okay. It's a different conversation. Let me give you another one. When the embryo has proven or with like a close to certainty very severe disorder or disability. And I'm blanking on specific terms, but let's say it has a very rare genetic disorder and it's extremely likely that it will be miscarriage down the line, or it will die within the first year, and it will have like a miserable first year, and the end of which, very sadly and unfortunately, it will just pass away. So what do you do then? It's an open question, right? It's but what the point that I think is not so open, the point I'm trying to make is, as soon as you take an issue and break it down to all these different scenarios, you begin to see that it's the arguments, the broad arguments you make about your mother's self-determination versus the right to life, they seem to take on a different meaning depending on context. And this is a very general statement, but I think the context you can actually break down into identifiable scenarios. That's what I strive to do, to have this kind of conversation. Okay, general pro-life or pro-choice, whatever, but let's see in this case. What if it's a combined thing? Another thing is, which is much less clear, social status of the family. And let's make it a clear example. What if we're talking about a mother who has 5 children, who is very poor, has no support network, and she got pregnant by accident. Let's not go down the rape route because that's relatively simple. But see, they didn't use protection, or they used it, but it didn't work. She has 5 kids already. She can't provide for them. Let's say they are on Social Security. Is it different? If she says, okay, I don't want a 6th kid, that kid will grow up in deep poverty. I already don't have enough money. What am I going to do?
So again, we're going back to the level of the individual. We're not painting it with a broad brush. We're seeing the specifics of each case and addressing it as it needs to be addressed with all the details surrounding it. And this is where the law in our what do you call it? This is where common law is much more adept to handling situations, because it can go by case, or more or less by case basis, where in our case, we are always trying, by virtue of the law, to get the general aspects legislated, and hope for the best.
I always find that incredibly fascinating how this choice of your legal system can lead to these kind of consequences down the line. But you know way more about this than I do. But as an outsider, that's how it feels, that, codifying everything, you have to do these informed judgments down to the finest detail versus allowing the judge to make
that's exactly what I'm saying.
Contextualized decision.
Exactly so. Balazs, I'm so sorry we have to cut this short. I feel like we could go on.
Oh yeah, for hours.
But it's an open invitation whenever you're willing to come, because this was fascinating. So thank you so much.
We'll be back. Thank you too for the opportunity.
Thanks so much. See you guys.